All right, let's do it. Let's do it. This is going to be the final lecture. What's going on, everybody? Um, this is going to be my final lecture for the summer course. I want to make sure I do two things in this lecture. One, I want to make sure that you are absolutely clear about what the final week of work, the film options I'm going to give you, as well as the final project, right? And obviously some due dates. I'm gonna put it in Moodle, but make sure I talk about it. And then I'm gonna give you a closing lecture that kind of brings together the material from previous unit, and then this crossover between black comedy, crossover, hip hop cinema, um, memory and performance, right? And the struggle over who gets to control the images, right? So let me begin with the work that you have to do, right? So the final week here, I've merged into one. You're not doing both options. I'm giving you two options, right? So you're going to choose one path to complete the course. Both options are designed to bring the whole course together, but they do with a slight sort of emphasis. With option one, I'm basically it's called hip hop cinema, black comedy, and the politics of survival. Right? If you choose that option, I want you to think about laughter, music, community, ideas of conflict and style, that kind of stuff. Right? This option is going to ask you to think about how black film uses humor and sound, not just to entertain, but also to expose what is broken, right? Or what is unresolved, right? And then in some to some extent, what's still being fought over, right? If you choose this particular route, you need to think about questions like, what is the film asking me to laugh at? When does the laughter become a bit uncomfortable, right? Um, is there an element of music and protest, or music and conflict or tension? Does the film create a sense of unity or community? Does the film divide? Does the film try to protect, right? Or maybe they do all of them. But the conversation needs to be, how does it do all that? So if you choose option one, you got two Spike Lee films, School Days and Do the Right Thing. For School Days, you'll look at, it's an old movie, right? I think I was in like, I don't know, freshman year of high school or something. So they're both Spike Lee movies, but it has a lot going on, right? And Do the Right Thing allows you to think about hip hop and protest and the police, right? Like tensions in the neighborhood and that kind of stuff, right? School Days is more of literally what I said. What is life like at a historically black college? Then obviously issues of colorism within the black community. Okay, that's option one. Option two is performance, memory, and who controls the image. If you choose option two, I want you to think about biography, marketability, the idea of controlling the image, and cultural memory, right? This option is going to ask you to consider what happens when black artists try to tell their own story inside the industry that often seek to kind of tie them up or lock them up or even just profit from or simplify the complexity of them, right? If you choose option two, you want to think about things like who gets erased, who gets remembered, what is the cost of success, right? Is there something that black artists might have to exaggerate or hide or sell just to become marketable, right? You can think about hip hop culture with that for real, right? What happens when black creativity gets turned into mere product, right? So your film choices for that is Dolomite is My Name or Straight Outta Compton, right? Dolomite is My Name is a remake of the 1970s Dolomite, and but it's still a question of independent filmmakers, and you can kind of see how black directors and black producers create for black folk. Straight Outta Compton is more of a urban film, right? Music is involved, right? Masculinity, gang life, stuff like that, right? So you can choose one of those two, right? Um, I think you should be able to find those, but you can get those probably on Netflix or maybe even Tubi or something like that. But they're not hard to find. To do the right thing, I'm pretty sure is on regular YouTube, right? Um, but for both of them, you need to make sure that you engage fully in the films, right? For your final not for your final, but for this week, right? And so, this week, you still have the questions to answer for Wednesday, and then you got the films for Sunday, right? So let me be very clear about deadlines, right? The this movie assignment is due this Sunday, right? Just like the rest of them are due on Sunday. So that means you should have complete the film questions by Sunday, but then you have a final project or a final report, and that's going to be due Friday the 7th, right, by midnight. So that's going to give you 5 days from the final movie assignment that's going to be due this Sunday to finish the final report, right? Does that make sense? Right. Let me just say this again because online classes get kind of confusing, right? Somebody's going to hear Friday and think next Friday, right? First of all, it's in your Moodle, so you can follow your Moodle, right? Um, and I want to try to be tight with these, right? Because I actually go on vacation Thursday the 6th. So I'll be looking on my email and Moodle Friday the 7th, right? To give me something to read on the beach, right? So you're going to choose either option one or option two. Option one focuses on black comedy and hip hop cinema, right? Issues of community, things like that. The film choices for option one are School Days or Do the Right Thing, both Spike Lee movies. Option two focuses on biography and fame and performance, right? Um, in option two, the film choices are Dolomite is My Name or Straight Outta Compton, right? Um, Again, this film assignment is going to be due on Sunday. Your weekly questions are due Wednesday, right? Then you have a final report, that final project, which is about 3 to 4 pages. I don't want plot summary, right? I know what happened in the movie, right? Wikipedia knows what happens in the movie. It's easy to find. I want an argument. I want some engagement. I want you to use some course terms. That's what an A or a B paper would look like. Use scenes in a movie or one of the movies you're going to use. Use lecture notes or things we talked about in the lectures or previous conversation. You're going to talk about the integration within the larger history of film, right? Terms, respectability, autonomy, stereotypes, commodification, stuff like that, right? I want to hear you use those terms, right? That's what final projects do. And so if you're going to be tempted to do something else, it's going to affect your grade, right? Right. So let me get a little lecture. So throughout this course, we've been thinking about one major question: who controls the image, right? That question has followed us from week one to now week four. When I mentioned early stereotypes, I was talking about things like who has the power to make black people appear like an Uncle Tom or appear like a mammy or a Sambo or a coon, right? Who has that kind of who has that power, right? And how is it that that black communities are able to give up that power, right? For somebody else's story, for somebody else's entertainment. When we talked about black beginnings and race films, right? We were asking questions like, what happens when black audience and black filmmakers look at a screen or look back at a screen that has spent so much time looking at them, right? Look back at it. Sorry, but looking at how are they been looking at me, right? How have they been seeing me? And now I need to represent myself in a different way, right? We were talking about issues like black dignity, what kind of black humanity can be represented on screen, right? Now, in this final week, we are asking what happens when black film becomes funny or popular, right? What happens when we're looking at the role of music in film and even commercially successful, right? Um, that is where black comedy, I think, and hip hop cinema enter this conversation, right? So if you think about comedy, black comedy is never just about being funny, right? I know we say things like, "Oh, it was just a joke," right? But sometimes that little phrase does a lot of damage, right? You may say, "It was just a joke. Stop tripping." You know what I'm saying? And sometimes people say that when they don't want to be responsible for what the joke is trying to teach or express, right? A joke can reveal a certain truth. A joke can hide truths. A joke can like swing at powerful people or it can swing down on people, right? Um, Jokes can free people like personally for a moment, or a joke can keep a stereotype alive, right? So when we're thinking about black comedy, we're not really trying to be the police of comedy, right? What should or shouldn't they have said, right? I'm not asking you to look at all films like that. I do that, but I'm not asking you to do that. But so I'm not telling you can't laugh, right? Laugh if it's funny, right? Please laugh if it's funny. But I think the question is, why am I laughing, right? Some of these performances are geniuses, like Eddie Murphy or Richard Pryor, Whoopi Goldberg, the late Bernie Mac, Chris Rock. I mean, these are funny. Cat Williams. These are funny people, right? Dave Chappelle, for instance, right? What's old girl name? Issa Rae. What's her name? Whoopi Goldberg, right? They're funny folk, right? And they carry some social criticism with them as well. So that's good, right? But we're also asking, like, what is the laughter attempting to do, right? That I think is the overall question. Not simply did I laugh, but what did the laugh make me do? Did it make me see something? Did it make me uncomfortable while laughing or after laughing? Did it expose some sense of hypocrisy or a repetition of certain stereotypes? Was the laughter a way for black autonomy and black freedom? Or was it just easier for me to digest because it was in a joke, right? That's what commodity means or commodification means, right? Commodification means turning something, a thing, into a product, right? And so in this class, what I want you to take away is what happens when blackness, black culture is something to sell, right? Black music sell, black culture sells. Sometimes black bodies on the street sells, right? Being cool, right, sells, right? Rebellion sells, right? That's why you'll see, um, uh, video views, right, on certain things go higher and higher when it comes to black folk and what they're doing, right? And so you have some producer who tapes it, edits it, and sells it back to us for consumption, right? That's what we mean by commodification. Now, it's not to say it's all bad. I'm not saying that, but when we think about culture as a commodity, something to be bought or sold. And then you need to ask the question, if you're thinking about that, what happens when black folk need the market, need the marketplace to tell a story, right? What happens when the industry says something like, well, we love your culture, but can you soften it up a little bit? Can you make it less angry? Yeah, that's cool, Dave Chappelle. You funny, but can you slow down on some of that anti-gay stuff or anti poor people or whatever, right? So it's like, I want to laugh, but I want to be comfortable. I don't want to be uncomfortable, right? And that's the what I call the crossover bargain, right? The bargain, a crossover appeal means like the ability of an artist or a performer able to reach beyond particular black audiences and move into particular mainstream white audiences, right? And crossover, the ability to crossover is powerful and is lucrative, right? Being visible matters, right? Being able to be visible in various cultures matter, right? And that's important, right? And the ability to be your film to be distributed, that's important, right? And you don't want your film to sit in the basement or sit on the shelf to be like, oh, this is authentic stuff, and nobody sees it, right? It may be pure and authentic, but it may not feed your family, right? But crossover or crossover sort of asks for a certain emotional payment, right? Almost a cultural payment. A performer may get access, but what must they give up, right? Do they have to be a little bit more funny, a little bit less threatening? Obviously, like with Sidney Poitier, more respectable. Maybe they got to be more hood, more urban. You know what I'm saying? Tell a few N-word jokes, right? People like that kind of stuff, and that's why these final films matter, right? So when you if you do option one, or when you watch School Jays, you're gonna see some wonderful music. You're gonna see some HBCU energy, but watch how Spike Lee stages conflict within black communities, right? I think there's a sense to which he says, black college is fun, but it's more than just fun, right? There's conversations around gender and class and power, right? And so I want you to be able to pull that out of a film like that, right? Um, for School Days, it's like can a young black person pursue education and pride without sort of reproducing a sort of a racial hierarchy? In this film, light skin versus dark skin, right? Kind of stuff, right? The city, the townies or the city against the college students, right? That's School Days. So now, if you choose to do the right thing, I want you to listen to the music. It's a lot of good music in there, primarily through Public Enemy, but others. But listen to the community, the music with Radio Raheem walking down with his boombox, the sound of people just trying to be heard, right? Um, I do the right thing. Starts off about a hot day, but it's more than just a hot day. It's about pressure. It's about the steam that builds up in a community when certain things like police brutality or police power, disrespect, all sit in the same block on a hot day, right? The film is not going to just give you the answers. It gives you it gives you a way to think about what are you going to do with this information, right? Does that make sense? So, in general, when we think about a term like hip hop cinema, we're not talking about just movies with rap music in the background. It's not just the fashion, like are they wearing a chain while a beat drops or got a Kango in it. But hip hop cinema, I argue, is a way of seeing black life after the civil rights movement, right? Especially the lives of black and brown young people in urban spaces, right? When we think about the 1960s and all those legal victories, well, now you see the aftermath in the 70s, in the late 70s and early 80s, right? And so post civil rights, it doesn't mean that racism is over. It means we're enjoying certain legal victories of the 60s, but there's still some issues, right? The schools may be desegregated. Housing might be illegal to discriminate, but who lives where and why is something to think about. What school is better than others? How it's funded becomes something to think about, right? Relationship to the police, right? How does that work, right? And so hip hop cinema engages in all that, right? The hip hop emerges out of all that contradictions, right? Created in a sense of artistry and style, but is also survival. What is sometimes ugly, right? It's testimony. It's bragging and braggadocio, but it's also I think is pain, right? So that's what hip hop cinema tries to accomplish, right? Um, and so if you're a hip hop fan and watching these movies, just understand that hip hop is just not something to put on, clothes or music. Um, yeah, it's not just that. It's more of an archive, a history. It remembers certain communities, certain beefs, right? Certain police encounters, and what my family struggle look like. What am I trying to seek in my life? Ambition, right? And I think that's why films like Do the Right Thing or even Friday. You might have saw Friday, Boys in the Hood, Set It Off, Juice. Movies like that. One of my favorite was New Jack City and Minister Society, right? You'll be watching straight out of Compton, but you know that's why those are powerful, powerful film because they become a language of space and masculinity at one level, but vulnerability and human agency on another level. Right? Does that make sense? I think. Um, so you're talking about agency in film, right? Agency is the same as autonomy. Right, we talked about that, right? The ability to sort of shape one's own life, right? And in hip hop cinema is not just about whether or not a character makes good or bad choices. That's true, but it's too simple. It's more so what choices are actually available, right? What are the social political forces that are existing that shape the choice or choices that this young black male or young black female is experiencing while they're living in certain structures or going to school in certain structures that limits their freedom, right? That's not to sort of blame or not even to sort of take responsibility. I don't do the nobody is responsible thing, right? um that's not serious to me. But I think we need to think about, though, we aren't we aren't going to just argue that everything is about individual choice, because that's not serious, like, intellectual thought. The serious work is somewhere in the middle of that, right? The serious work is thinking about sort of how is it that personal choices within social structures, how do they sort of collide, right? And I think hip hop culture does that, right? Now let's look at option two, right? If you choose option two, a Dolomite is my name, or Straight Outta Compton. Dolomite is an old movie um, about a character named Rudy, well, a real person named Rudy Ray Moore, but his name is Dolomite. And he builds his own lane, he builds his own persona based on a urban America that doesn't pay him attention, right? That's autonomy, that's a sense of hustle, right? And but warning, the film is kind of vulgar, right? Sometimes it's kind of ridiculous, especially the original one. The one that you'll be watching ain't as bad. But if you want to watch the original Dolomite, it's kind of rough, right? Um, but uh, uh, but it's important, right? Because it's loud, right? And it's making noise intentionally, right? Is Rudy Ray Moore trying to Yes, he's trying to be funny, I guess, but it's more so what kind of freedom did his performance create that, yeah, we laughed at some of it, but some of it made us uncomfortable, right? Because we had to ask like who was the audience, and what is it that the audience sees that maybe the most of Hollywood didn't see, right? And maybe this question of respectability has to be revisited at a certain level, right? And this is an important film, right? Especially the old one, but even this new one with Eddie Murphy, right? It becomes a question of whether or not black art is clean enough, it's respectful enough, right? But as we know, black life, anybody's life, is not always elegant, right? It can be church programs. It could be some spades at a cookout, right? It's different, right? Some drunk uncle telling a story that that has a sense of vulgarity and funny, but they're loud and but at the same time deeply human, right? So that's Dolomite, right? The other film you could choose from if you choose option two is Straight Outta Compton, right? Straight Outta Compton is about NWA, which is the rap group that Ice Cube and Eazy-E and them was in. It's about fame. It's about business exploitation. Um, um, and I think how do you translate localized anger into a global product, right? Um, Dre, of course, is in NWA. Dr. Dre, right? But I want you to watch how music is created from anger, right? And watch how music becomes money, right? And then how the money changed some relationships, right? There's a sense to which rebellion in the film becomes a sense of brand, right? And so cultural memory, that term cultural memory, is going to be important to think about as well. What cultural memory is what is a community remembering? How is a story being told, right? And biographical films, as we talked about with Jackie Robinson, isn't it's intentional, right? It chooses certain things and leaves certain things out, right? It makes certain people look great, other people look kind of flat, right? Um, it can simplify people for audiences comfort. So if you think about Straight Outta Compton, if you choose that, ask yourself what version of history is being presented in this film, right? What is the film trying to get me to admire or trying to get me to forgive and forget, right? And I think that's not an accusation of the film. I think that's just what I think an analysis would look like, right? And I think every film in this probably in this final week is going to necessitate that you watch actively, not passively. Watch as if the film is making an argument, and your job is to identify what the argument is. If it's School Days, what's the argument about black communities? If you choose Do the Right Thing, what's the argument about rage and protest being unheard within the urban space, right? If you choose The Dolomite is My Name film, um, what's the argument about black performance and autonomy and making your own way? Or Straight Outta Compton, um, what argument is being made about hip hop and police power, cultural memory, and that kind of thing, right? Um, I think that should be helpful, right? Wait me 1 second. So let me wrap this up. Excuse me. So as we close the course, I want to return to where we started. Black film matters because images teach. Images sort of teach us about humanity. It teaches us about danger and who is dangerous, about protection, about who gets laughed at and who gives the laughs. It teaches us, films teach us the desirability. the complexity. Um, I think the film teaches us about childhood, a development, right? The coming of age kind of stuff, right? It has to go through stereotypes, right? Remember, stereotype is more than just a bad picture; it's more of a lesson. It trains the audiences to see what to see or what to expect before the character even becomes whole, right? And that's why representation matters, right? And as you talked about like a couple weeks ago, just being visible does not make you free, right? You can be visible and not understood, right? So you talked about that already. So remember that. And just because you got black actors on the film doesn't necessarily mean you're involved in protests, right? Or liberation, right? Is the film trying to teach something? If so, who's it teaching, right? And what's the lesson, right? So when you're writing these final wrap ups again, I don't want to hear this movie is good or this movie is funny, you know, or even a simple line like this movie is about racism. I mean that's true, but give me some more. You know, if you like the music, excuse me, that's cool, right? That's not analysis, right? Instead, you wanna make sure you think about things like, this film uses music as a form of protest, and here's how it does it, and it shows how protest can become marketable to a wider audience, right? Or this film uses, black comedy to challenge what respectability politics is or is not, and it identifies with black self definition, and it doesn't always have to be polite or respectful or respectable, right? Stuff like that, right? And then you engage your pages like that, right? Yeah, you want to use some scenes, right? That's important. You want to use some terms, of course, that's absolutely necessary. But you don't necessarily have to take me through a plot summary. I know the film, right? Make an argument, not a summary of the movie. That makes sense? Again, use terms, use scenes, right? Use the lectures. Go back and look at these few. This is just your final grade. You might want to put another hour, hour and a half in to look at some notes, to look through, to revisit my lectures. Um, don't hide behind summary. I'm looking for claims or argument. Make a claim, right? So, um, black film is one of the places where America argues with itself. It argues over race. It argues over freedom. It argues over memory, laughter. Um, it argues over police and music. Sometimes even money and definitely gender, sexual orientation, stuff like that, right? Um, sometimes the screen lies. Sometimes the screen tells the truth before even the screen or the people watching is ready to hear the truth. Sometimes the movie can sell us a cleaner version. Sometimes it might give us a ugly, messy version that may feel more honest than the official story. So your job in this final assignment is not to prove that your film is perfect. None of these films are perfect, right? Your job is to show what your film is revealing about the struggle to be fully seen, to be fully heard. Because really, I think that's what I was trying to get to this course was all about. Not just black folk on the screen, but black people fighting for the terms of appearance. How will I appear on the screen? Not just if I'm seen, but how I'm seen, right? Not just inclusion, but who controls the image, right? If you're laughing at school, but what is the cost of that laughter, right? Those type of questions, right? Um, I think so. You can choose your film carefully, right? Watch it closely, take notes, and pay attention to sound, to the different scenes, the way the body moves, uh, jokes. or even quiet or silence, right? Look at neighborhoods and atmosphere, the way cameras, especially with Spike Lee, he uses cameras brilliantly, probably better than any any director in Hollywood. And then give me a final report that gives you something to say. This is my last words to you, Dr. Bailey. Come on, don't play with me. I'm giving you a break. So I finished strong and give me some good stuff to read about when I'm on the beach. All right, take care, stay strong. Let's knock it out.